October 13th, 1993.
These days, nothing is sacred. He has removed the guards from Lenin's tomb, banned opposition newspapers, dissolved the parliament, and suspended the high court. Tonight, is Boris Yeltsin building a new democracy or a new dictatorship?
This is ABC News Nightline. Substituting for Ted Koppel and reporting from Washington, Chris Wallace.
Boris Yeltsin returned from a trip to Japan late tonight, defending his actions to crush the Russian parliament. Governments sometimes have to use force, he said, and of course that is indisputable. But what's very much in dispute in Moscow these days is where Yeltsin's rule by decree is taking the country. Supporters say the Russian president is engaged in authoritarian democracy, using force to stabilize the country until it's ready for more reform. But others look at the attack on the parliament, the shutting down of opposition parties and newspapers, and see something different. A return to the tradition of ruthless Russian leaders that goes back to the czars. All this is more than just a spectator sport for us here in the U.S. President Clinton put the government firmly behind Yeltsin's actions. Now, as Russians wonder how Yeltsin is going to use his new power, Mr. Clinton must be wondering too. So, is Yeltsin a Democrat or a dictator? ABC's David Emser found that in Moscow, it's a debate that's going on, even among neighbors.
It was designed to be much more than an apartment building. Completed in 1955 after 6 years of work, it was to be a monument to the Soviet proletariat. A communist shrine. To make room for it, they cleared away a church. The address, number 1 Plaza of the Rebellion. Its residents had a ringside seat last week as Boris Yeltsin's troops blasted the rebels into submission.
I kept going to the window to take a look, but I just couldn't watch. I was too scared, and my wife and son kept telling me to get away from there.
It is a terrible state of affairs when Russians kill Russians, but I do think Yeltsin was quite right to do what he did.
I think the defenders of the parliament are heroes. The time will come when our country will pay homage to them.
Not if Boris Yeltsin gets his way. Accused by many pro-reform Russians of not being tough enough, Boris Yeltsin has turned activist. Having already abolished the legislative branch of government, he took on the judicial branch, suspending for now the Supreme Court of the land, the Constitutional Court. Yeltsin fired disloyal politicians, banned parties accused of involvement in the rebellion, and closed several publications. He imposed a curfew on the city of Moscow. For the first time since World War II, the only people allowed on the street at night are in uniform. But Yeltsin's new activism is dividing Russians even more. Outside number 1 Plaza of the Rebellion, they stop and stare at the blackened remains of their parliament building. And then, the arguments start.
I think the storming of the White House gave us a chance to avoid a civil war. The people holed up in that building wanted to seize control.
A person who cannot agree with 1,400 people's deputies has no right to run this country.
It wasn't just people's deputies. There were fascists defending the White House, too.
Are you calling me a fascist?
Or am I a fascist? I'm not calling you one personally, but you were on the same side as the fascists. You were in it together, and that's a fact. You were in it together. You were with them.
We believe that some of Russia's finest died in that building.
To a great extent, Russians choose sides based on how they've done since Yeltsin took power. On the 3rd floor, Boris Umalatov has gotten rich trading in oil and other resources.
This was a tragedy, no question. But without this tragedy, we couldn't move any further towards democracy. It was a necessary evil.
Contrast that with the view of many Russians living on fixed incomes.
Everyone is angry because everything is so expensive, and they're looking for someone to blame. so they blame Yeltsin.
I'm 67 years old, and I'm half-starved. What kind of politician do you think I will support? I just want to be able to come to a shop and buy what I need.
But unlike just a few years ago, the market downstairs now has plenty of food for sale. Those who don't have to survive on a pension seem better off than before.
Come here into the shop and you will see meat and cheese and everything. During Brezhnev's times, you could see nothing, only queues. So life became better. That's the fact. And that's why nobody supported these communists.
Once the smoke had cleared, Yeltsin reiterated his promise. Elections for a new parliament in December, just 9 weeks from now. The timing could work well for him. Opponents of his reforms will have little time to organize their campaigns. Some in the building are not pleased.
December is too soon. We need more time to learn about the candidates. Otherwise, we could get something even worse than we had before.
And others are skeptical that real democracy will take root in Russia.
What do you mean by democracy? Democracy in what sense? Democracy in the American sense? It'll never happen here.
Just look back through the pages of Russian history. There's blood on every one of them. This is our tragedy. Sure, things may turn out all right, maybe in 20 years, not now.
At #1 Plaza of the Rebellion and throughout the country, despite the bloodshed, most still support their president. He is doing the dirty work for them on the way Russians hope from communism to democracy. I'm David Ensor for Nightline in Moscow.
Even if Boris Yeltsin's reforms do survive, where will they take the country? When we come back, the political director of a Moscow-based think tank. Two American scholars will help us answer that question.
This is ABC News Nightline, brought to you by Carnival Cruise Lines.
When it comes to great resorts, nothing beats a Carnival cruise. All your daytime fun, all your nighttime shows and entertainment, and all your foods included too in one low price. Reach, what are you doing here?
You have to ask?
I think I do have to ask.
I mean,
yes.
after all these years, I bet you could see me now.
It must be working, huh?
Working on me.
Take a 3-, 4-, or 7-day vacation on Carnival, the most popular cruise line in the world.
All right, Kathy, it's all fun. Shit.
I've been a stage and screen director for a long time, and Stella's been an actress for a long time.
For 30 years, we put money in Dreyfus Mutual Funds every month. Dreyfus is a leader in mutual funds.
In mutual funds, we're diversified over many, many stocks.
That's good.
Now, they say the play's the thing. Now, mutual funds aren't too bad either.
You're saying it all. Let's do this again. Wait a minute.
The nuclear debris of a crumbling Soviet Union is for sale. Chris Wallace, with hidden cameras, shops for the ingredients of destruction. Primetime Thursday.
I know we're going to be happy, but I worry sometimes. We want to have a family, so we don't want anything to go wrong with the health insurance. We don't want to give up the Blue Cross HMO. They have more doctors and more places, all the benefits we need, and I know we can afford it. This health care reform, I don't know. I hope they don't ruin a good thing.
Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Illinois. A better healthcare system. Right here, right now.
Lincoln Mark 8, the big engine that could. Lincoln Mark 8 features an all-leather interior, standard dual airbags, and standard ABS brakes. Everything that's made Mark 8 the best-selling luxury sport coupe in America. All for $499 a month for 24 months. Will a lease this attractive make you a Mark 8 driver? Lincoln Mark 8 at your Lincoln Mercury dealer now.
Joining us now from Moscow, Andrei Kortunov is a political analyst at the U.S.-Canada Institute, a Moscow-based think tank. David Remnick is a staff writer for The New Yorker and the author of a book on the disintegration of the Soviet Union. He joins us from our New York studios. And joining us from our Washington bureau is Peter Reddaway, a professor of political science at George Washington University. He has just returned from a trip to Moscow. Mr. Reddaway, you have been very critical of Mr. Yeltsin, saying that he has seriously undermined the rule of law in recent weeks. Why is it that his actions shouldn't be seen as tough but necessary steps to protect democracy?
I think the main problem is that what he did on September 21st was a very clear violation of the Russian Constitution and of the rule of law. Of course, he was under enormous provocation from the leaders of the parliament and from his vice president, Rudskoy. But what he did was, I think, very, very dangerous. And almost all the people I spoke to in Moscow over the last couple of weeks emphasized to me that, in their opinion, Yeltsin could have searched longer and harder for a compromise before taking that devastating step. The reason it is so devastating is that law was the one guiding principle that the Russians have had over the last couple of years since all their old familiar values of the Soviet system collapsed. It was the one thing that kept some sort of stability in an economically and politically very confused situation. That has now gone, and it means that the danger of other coups in the future, the emergence of even possibly terrorism, if considerable sections of the population find themselves cut out of the political process, which Yeltsin has now cut them out of, all this becomes a very serious issue indeed.
Mr. Reddaway, let me bring in David Remnick if I can. Well, what about what Mr. Reddaway is saying? Has Yeltsin gone too far? Has he done some irreparable damage to the reform movement, to democracy?
Well, I think certainly this was a tragedy. There's no doubt about that. And even Yeltsin has said that we should not consider this a great victory, even though these events may, we hope, clear the way and move toward democracy if the elections are in fact fair. But let's make one thing clear. I wish Peter were right that this was a violation of a legal state somehow. But what existed in Russia was quite a lawless state in many respects, including the fact that there was dual power in Russia. There was a Soviet-era parliament doing battle with a democratically elected president. And while we might not like what happened in September, certainly we have to view it in that context.
The tragedy, if I can butt in for a second, is that they were gradually moving their way towards some sort of a compromise prior to September 21st, which would have taken the form of simultaneous elections for a new parliament together with elections for the presidency. And if only those two elections had been able to take place, I think the problems, the very real problems that David Remnick has just mentioned, would have had some chance of being alleviated.
But Peter, let's remember there was a referendum that the parliament didn't even want in the first place, in which Yeltsin overwhelmingly won the support of the people. His policies won the support of the people, and early calls for parliamentary elections won the support of the people. The only thing that didn't win the support of the people was a call for early presidential elections. And during the siege of the parliament, there were in fact negotiations to call simultaneous elections. It was rejected by Rudskoy, rejected by Khasbulatov, and it was Rudskoy who called on his corps of fanatics to storm the television center. And so I really think the blood is on his hands, no matter how morally ambiguous and political risky Yeltsin's decree was in the first
Mr. Reddaway,
place.
let me bring you to that, because whatever you think of the original call to dissolve the parliament, once Rudskoy had sent his followers and those people who were doing it for their own reasons into the streets, to the TV station, didn't Yeltsin have to restore order and even use force to do so?
I think there's a very strong case that David has made that once Rudskoy did that, Yeltsin was forced to take strong action, and it would have to be forceful up to some point. But I also found very strong criticism in Moscow over the last 2 weeks for the way in which Yeltsin used force, and it was regarded widely that he did it on a very much larger scale than was actually necessary. The vision of the Russian president bombarding the White House with cannons was something that was horrendous to Russians, and they feel that Yeltsin spilt much too much blood. Of course, they also feel that Rudskoy was responsible for starting the serious bloodshed.
Let me bring in Mr. Kortunov, who is in Moscow this evening. What would Boris Yeltsin make of this squeamishness with his tactics?
Well, I think that Boris Yeltsin right now is in a position to claim that he restored the law and order in the country, that his opposition is just a bunch of lunatics and fanatics. However, I think that basically his actions suggest that he failed as a statesman, because as the president of Russia, he had to seek consensus and to preserve some fragile balance of powers that we had after the August coup that took place 2 years ago. However, I don't think that Mr. Yeltsin, no matter how authoritarian-minded he might be right now, is in a position to restore a strong authoritarian power in Moscow and in the country. First of all, I think that Russia is simply too big to be ruled by an authoritarian leader from the center, and the regions are still too independent to be guided by people from Moscow. And second, I think it's important to take into account that there is a new generation of people who will not tolerate an authoritarian regime, and this new generation will tame any attempts of Boris Yeltsin or his possible successors to impose a rigid authoritarian regime on Russia that might follow in the future.
Mr. Kortunov, you talk about the circumstances around him. Give us an understanding of Yeltsin himself. Are his tendencies more towards the strong man of the past or more towards reform and democracy?
Well, I think that we should distinguish between reform and democracy. Clearly, Yeltsin wants radical economic reforms, and he believes in radical economic reforms. However, it does not necessarily mean that Yeltsin is a Democrat in the Western sense of the word. After all, he made his career through the bureaucracies of the communist parties. And true, he was a Democrat when he had to use democracy as a vehicle to bring him to the top power. However, if you take the situation during the last 2 years, I wouldn't say that we achieved much in terms of further democratization of the Russian society. And I personally felt much more secure under Gorbachev than I feel under Yeltsin.
Gentlemen, we have to break in here briefly. When we return, I want to ask you all about the U.S. role in all this and whether Russia can ever be a true democracy. And we'll be back in a moment.
I'm a nurse, and I'm a nurse first, and I'm an Aetna employee second. The care is first. You know, is that patient being handled appropriately? I would hope that we would all care about patients the way we would ourselves or our own family members. And that's the way I see it. That, you know, that's my job.
Announcing the Chrysler New Yorker lease. For only $286 a month, the car you've admired on the road can easily be in your driveway. New Yorker provides a spacious 6-passenger interior, dual airbags, a 214 horsepower engine, and ABS brakes. But don't delay. This is a limited offer. Chrysler New Yorker, an eloquent expression of form following function. At your Chrysler Plymouth dealers for only $286 a month.
Next Time had a search for a new home through a computer.
Plus how a decade of cell phones has changed America.
And Julia Child on Good Morning America.
Over 1.5 million vacationers toured the canals of Venice last year. Not one of them, however, was a Lexus engineer. Why? Let's just say they were busy. The 1994 Lexus ES, improved, revised, refined, embellished. In a word, new.
You can see it in their faces. It works. LaSalle lends money to more people for more reasons than anyone else. You can tell by the plans they're making. It works. LaSalle is a leader in business loans, keeping the city that works working. Put your bank to work for you. Call on LaSalle, the bank that works. You can tell by their sense of security, it works.
Illinois Bell is ringing in, a brand new identity. Now you can call us Ameritech.
How'd they get this number?
Ameritech, more than ever, your link to a better life. You've just written your last check to Illinois Bell. From now on, you'll be making them out to Ameritech. Ameritech, more than ever, you're linked to a better life.
Got that, Ed?
Check.
And we're back now with Andrei Kortunov, David Remnick, and Peter Reddaway. Mr. Reddaway, if you're right, if Yeltsin has seriously undermined the rule of law in recent weeks, did President Clinton make a mistake in backing him?
Yes, I'm afraid he did, particularly the way that he backed him. Over and over again, talking with liberals and centrists and rightists in Moscow, I found strong criticism of Clinton for being so unequivocal. Several people said to me that if only he had expressed even some element of understanding of the complexity of the situation in Moscow, it would have made an enormous difference. But for Russians to be watching their president bombarding the White House to the applause of Mr. Clinton was a very tragic feeling, and over again people said anti-Americanism is rising in Russia, and terrorism is likely to develop in the coming weeks and months, and one of the targets, various different people told me, would be Americans. So I'm afraid Mr. Clinton did not handle this well. I'm not saying he should have expressed no support for Mr. Yeltsin. I think it would have been reasonable to express a certain conditional support, but also to show that he understood the feelings of people who had no interest in violence, but who took a different view.
Mr. Kortunov, do you agree with Professor Reddaway's analysis that this is going to lead to greater anti-Americanism and that there's a very critical feeling about what President Clinton did?
Well, I wouldn't be that pessimistic. I think that there are some people who are anti-American and who will continue to be anti-American in Russia. However, I don't think that they represent a large section of the society, and I don't think that we'll see any terrorist actions taken against Americans. I don't see any terrorist actions right now in Moscow. However, I think that there are people and there are some media that accuse the United States in hypocrisy. They try to make the point that for the United States, stability is much more important than democracy, and economic reforms are much more important than constitutional norms. They just suggest the situation when President Clinton could bombard the Capitol Hill and possible reaction of the American society to that. And so they claim that the United States used double standards in judging the situation in Russia.
Well,
let me ask you about that, David Remnick.
Let's remember that the road to American democracy, even after the revolution and even after we had a stable constitution, was not exactly smooth. There was a suspension of habeas corpus under President Lincoln, the jailing of socialists under sedition acts under Woodrow Wilson, the attempt even by Franklin Roosevelt to stack a Supreme Court in his favor. Now, I'm not suggesting in any way that the bombardment of a parliament is a great step forward for democracy, but we have to look at where we're coming from in the former Soviet Union. This is the fall of a great totalitarian empire. We are only 2 years after it. This process is going to go on for years and years and years, and to think that we could have had a stable democracy after the August coup of 1991 was pure romanticism. And maybe what's happened in the last few years, in the last few weeks, excuse me, is to understand that this process is going to be grim and long and painful. And episodes like what happened in the last couple of weeks may be ahead of us once again. And we have to remember that the American government can exert pressure on President Yeltsin, and the way it should do that is to make sure these elections are democratic and are fair, which is going to be extremely difficult to do in the space of just 6 weeks.
Mr. Kortunov, you know, there is some thinking that David Remnick made mention of in this country now, that what the events of the last few weeks prove is that Russia can never be a true democracy. What do you think of that?
Well, first of all, I don't think that Russia is an exception. I think that Russians are in no way different from other peoples, and therefore I do believe that we can acquire some democratic norms. I also believe that the new generation of Russians are able to live in a democratic society, and I think that they're able to defend the society if it is necessary. That's why I don't think that any leader, including Mr. Yeltsin or whoever it is, will be in a position to impose a rigid authoritarian regime on Russia. However, I think that the road to constitutionalism will be a hard one, because Russia is very complex. It's a large country, and therefore it will be not that easy to find a proper balance of interests between different regions, between different political groups, and between different social groups in the society. So I think though the road to democracy is the only road that Russia might follow in future, this road will be difficult, but this is exactly why the American encouragement and American standards are so important. I don't think that we should just accept the notion that this road will be difficult and tough. We should try to set some standards.
And that's our report for tonight. I'm Chris Wallace in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.
If you wish a videocassette version of Nightline, the cost is $14.98, plus $3.95 shipping and handling. If you wish a printed transcript of this or any Nightline broadcast, please send $5 to Journal Graphics, 1535 Grant Street, Denver, Colorado, 80203, or call 303-831-9000.
Nightline is a presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source.